Hello, dear viewers. Today we're going to be talking about the Quad and how India and Japan, by working together, can strengthen it. Both India and Japan have territorial conflicts with China, and China has often tried to use its military to pressure India and Japan into giving concessions to it, like it does with other countries in the region. India and Japan have so far not given any territory to China and have continuously opposed it. But they still have diplomatic relations with China, they trade with China. So, and at the moment, if China were to engage militarily and try to violently take over these territories from both these countries, difficult to see how India and Japan will be able to defend themselves, even with the support of the other two members of the Quad. Therefore, um, India and Japan need to develop themselves, both militarily and economically, to in order to deter China from engaging in such military aggression. The Indian Army chief said that the China's military incursions on the Indian border could be a trigger for escalation of the boundary dispute and could lead to a wider conflict. He also said that great power rivalry playing out between China and the US is influencing bilateral ties between Delhi and Beijing, and he held the People's Liberation Army responsible for violating its border agreements with India. Has the Indian government is considering a proposal to build 37 more roads with a cumulative length of 875 kilometers along the India-China border. This is 13,000 crore work and has been proposed under the India-China Border Roads Program. The ICBR project envisages developing infrastructure along the China-India border. Nearly 70% of the roads under the phase 3 of the ICBR would be built in Arunachal Pradesh. Now, phase 1 and 2 were uh, the roads were built in Ladakh, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh at around 1,600 crores. So phase 3 is going to be more expensive than both of the phase 1 and phase 2. So yeah, this is an expense for India, but it's necessary. And by building better infrastructure along the border, it can help move troops quickly in case there is a conflagration with China. And so this can deter China from being aggressive and is set to ramp up patrolling of its territorial waters amid the increasing presence of Chinese vessels in and around the waters near the Senkaku Islands, known as the Diaoyu Islands in China. The Fumio Kishida government has developed a policy to boost the country's coast guard capabilities, including patrolling its waters by ship and aircraft. The Senkaku Islands are a group of islands that are lying northeast of Taiwan and west of the Okinawa Islands. They are claimed by China and Taiwan. This is an important fact to note that Taiwan, because it is called the Republic of China and is ruled by the government that was exiled from China in its civil war, it still claims territory that the PRC also claims. So this shows that it's hard to say that Taiwan is truly an independent country from China, and that countries like Japan and India will have to engage with Taiwan on the border disputes. And the Chinese government's ships last month navigated Japanese waters in the area for more than 72 hours. This is the longest ever continued intrusion of its kind since the Japanese government purchased some of the islands from a private Japanese owner in 2012. In December, the Japanese government approved a draft budget for the next fiscal year for a record 138 trillion yen, 862 billion US dollars, with a record high defense budget in the amount of 6.8 trillion yen. Not only then, in 2022, the military spending was 1.24% of GDP, and the government has decided to increase its defense spending to 2% of the country's gross domestic product by 2027. In March, Japan moved hundreds of troops, including missile units, into a new base built on a remote island near China and Taiwan as it seeks to bolster its defensive capabilities in the region. 570 ground self-defense forces members will be stationed at the newly established garrison on Ishigaki Island in Okinawa Prefecture. A few days ago, actually, Japan, in its remote islands in the Okinawa Prefecture, on March 18th, carried out its first simulated exercise that aims at evacuating around 100,000 residents from remote islands close to Taiwan. This is in case there's a military conflict across the Taiwan Strait when China invades Taiwan and the US responds. This is preparation for that. The Japanese Prime Minister Kishida Fumio was in India on a 2-day visit from March 20th. It's possible that Kishida visited New Delhi because Japan wanted to assuage any Indian unhappiness because the Japanese foreign minister did not attend the G20 foreign ministers meeting. And as far as I know, I haven't read anything that India is upset with Japan for this. And while in New Delhi, Kishida invited Modi to attend the G7 summit in Hiroshima in May, and this was accepted by the Indian Prime Minister. Japan is heading the G7 this year, while India is heading the G20 this year. So there's going to be cooperation between both of these groupings. In 2020, Kishida also gave a speech at the Indian Council of World Affairs about Japan's new plans for the free and open Indo Pacific. He talked about the need to build economic relations based on trust, free from coercion and threats of force, and expressed concern about such connections becoming a breeding ground for political vulnerability. China's pattern of using coercive trade practices because of the dependencies that many economies have with China is what he's talking about here, with both India and Japan having trade deficits with China because China uh, imposes tariffs and against foreign goods and favors its own goods. This causes an imbalance in trade with other countries. Should be allowed to speak on the internet. So we can see that uh, Japan and India are cooperating more. So, but the most important thing to see is the military strength of India and Japan versus China in case a conflict actually arises. For first of all, starting with Japan. This is Japan's Air Force in 2023. The number of aircraft is 1,451, fighter aircraft is 217, transport aircraft is 58, and helicopters is 566. Japan should have 2,000 aircrafts, 300 fighter aircrafts, 100 transport aircrafts, and 800 helicopters. This will be enough to uh, fight off the first wave of any invasion by the China's air force. And I think that uh, the Air Force will be the first uh, line of defense for Japan. The land force in 2023, Japan has 111,180 vehicles. Number of tanks is 1,004. Self-propelled artillery 238. Rocket artillery 99. Number of vehicles, it should grow up to 150,000. Number of tanks should be 2,000. Self-propelled artillery is should be 400, and there should be 200 rocket artilleries. Therefore, if uh, China, when it invades, does land on Taiwan, on Japan, Japan will have enough armed forces in its army to defend the country. And the naval force, Japan in 2023, the total assets are 155, aircraft carriers are zero, there are 36 destroyer ships and 21 submarines. In 2030, the total assets should be 300. Aircraft carriers should be two, which means that they should start building two aircraft carriers this year itself, or they should buy one from another country, preferably a country like the US. And the destroyers should go up to 50, and the submarines should go up to 30. This will make uh, the seas almost not impenetrable, but very costly for China to cross. After all, it wants to get the Senkaku Islands, so the prime battles will be in the sea. So Japan's naval force will be its uh, most important force. For India, its air force in 2023, the number of aircraft is 2,210. Its fighter aircraft are 577, transport aircraft are 254, and helicopters are 807. In 2030, the number of aircraft should go up to almost double to 4,000. Fighter aircraft should be 1,000, transport aircraft should be 350, and helicopters 1,200. This it's important for India to grow its air force to such an extent because it can help tip the balance against China in case China invades Ladakh or Arunachal Pradesh, and if India wants to reclaim Aksai Chin, uh, because um, the air force can overpower not just China's air force, but can also help the army as well. The land force, the number of vehicles are to 100,882. Number of tanks is 4,614. Self-propelled artillery there are 100, and number of rocket artillery is 1,500. In 2030, India should have 180,000 vehicles, 6,200 tanks, 250 self-propelled artillery, and 4,000 rocket artillery. I think this will be enough to prevent China from holding on to any territory that it might gain in case of an invasion. It'll uh, cause such a heavy loss of personnel and equipment in the Chinese PLA that some of the units from China will retreat. The naval force of India. In 2023, India has a total of 295 assets. Of this, two aircraft carriers, 11 destroyers, 18 submarines. India's total naval assets should double to 500. Aircraft carriers, one more should be added to make it three. Destroyers, there it should go up to 24, and submarines should go up to 26. This will be enough to help India uh, prevent Chinese ships from entering its waters, and can also be enough to block the Malacca Strait to prevent oil and other goods from the Middle East from entering China. Now, as for China itself, let's see its military strength. Its Air Force. In 2023, number of aircraft is 3,284, fighter aircraft is 1,336, transport aircraft is 288, helicopters is 913. In 2030, China, I think, should aim to get double the amount of aircraft with 6,500. 1,500 of these should be fighter aircraft. There should be 400 transport aircraft and 1,300 helicopters. The land forces, China's number of vehicles is 174,300, and its tanks is 4,950, which is not much different, more than India, but not greatly different. Not a great difference from India. Self-propelled artillery is 2,795. Rocket artillery is 3,145. In 2030, China should have 220,000 vehicles, 8,200 tanks, 4,000 self-propelled artillery, and 5,200 rocket artillery. Naval force. It has 730 total assets, 2 aircraft carriers, 50 destroyers, and 78 submarines. In 2030, um, its total assets should be 1,000. Its aircraft carriers should double to 4. There should be 80 destroyers and 90 submarines. This will help it give it an edge over Japan in the Navy due to sheer force of numbers. Now, India plus Japan. What is the combined strength of both these countries? In 2023, the number of aircraft that both of them have is 3,661. Number of fighter aircrafts is 471. Number of transport aircrafts is 312. And number of helicopters is 1,373. So this is a good amount. China, for example, has fewer number of aircrafts. So yeah, but it needs to increase by 2030. According to the previous numbers I showed, India and Japan will have 6,000 aircrafts, 1,300 aircraft, fighter aircrafts, 450 transport aircrafts, and 2,000 helicopters. Now, by this time, China will still have 500 more aircraft, but that's not an insurmountable number. Its fighter aircraft will be 1,500, which will still be more than India and Japan's. Transport aircraft will also be more, and but India and Japan will have more helicopters, so that could help. Land force. In 2023, India and Japan have 212,062 vehicles, 5,618 tanks, 338 self-propelled artillery, and rocket artillery is 1,599. Chi- this is a large number of vehicles than China has, and more tanks than China has, but China has greater self-propelled artillery and rocket artillery. By 2030, India and Japan will have 330,000 vehicles, and this will be more than what China has. Tanks, uh, it'll have 6,200, which will still be less than China's. Self-propelled artillery, 650. Self-propelled artillery for China by this time will be, it'll have 4,200 or rocket artilleries, while China will have 5,200. So close enough to prevent China from completely dominating in this area. So by 2030, India and Japan will have evened out the balance between it and China on the land and its naval force. Today, India and Japan have 450 total assets, while China has 730, so China beats both. In India and Japan have the same number of aircraft carriers as China, which is two. China they have 47 destroyers, while China has 50, which is a similar number. And but they have only 39 submarines, while China has 78, which is close to double. So that's a big advantage for China. And India and Japan will have 655 total assets. Aircraft carriers will be 5, destroyers will be 74, submarines will be 56. While they'll be greatly outnumbered in submarines, they'll have more aircraft carriers and less destroyers, but not too great of a difference. So, yeah, we can see the naval force will also balance out and will impose a greater cost against China if it tries to invade both countries at the same time. So, if India and Japan continue to grow their militaries and have more training exercises, make their militaries interoperable, they will be able to defend themselves against China. And if that they can come to each other's aid in case there's a military conflict with China, then they can defend themselves against China, and especially with the support of the other two Quad members, Australia and most importantly the United States, they might be able to actually fend off the Chinese. So, yeah, I have spoken about the naval strength of the entire Quad in a previous video. You will see a link to that on the screen. So, there's a lot of reason to be hopeful for both India and Japan, and for them, they are for the Quad, they are the countries which have most at stake in the relationship with China. So, it's important that they become very strong. And yeah, that's pretty much all I want to say. Please give your feedback for this video in the comments section. If you want to see other videos about the quad, click here. If you want to see my previous video, click here. If you want to see the sources I use for this video, click the links in the description below. Thank you for watching. Vande Mataram.